Hello to everyone and welcome to the Conscious Agility series. This is part number 2 and we had part number 1 before. So without too much more to say, I'm going to invite Brad Barton and Mark Ferraro into the conversation. How are you, gentlemen?
Hello, doing well, thank you.
Doing well here as well. It's good to see you gentlemen again.
Always a pleasure.
Likewise. So we had part 1 relative to conscious agility, where we really dived into conscious capitalism, right? Business agility, anti-fragility, resilience a little bit, kind of give a little bit of context. And today our focus is around transformation and evolutionary transformation and what all of that is all about.
Sounds good.
So where do we start?
I guess I can jump in. I think that the big one is evolutionary transformation. I think that's something that has always been the approach from the beginning, from our perspective, is meeting the organization where they're at, coming in with a canned solution or saying, here's the way, this is the way we're going to make your organization better, is not an approach that works. So really meeting the organization where they're at and taking them on the journey, or going with them on the journey.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really led us down this path was the concept of, or the belief that folks don't necessarily, you always hear it, like, nobody likes change. And I think we had always agreed that it's not that people don't appreciate or understand the need for change. People don't like to be changed. People don't like to have change inflicted upon them.
Yes.
Well, and I think, our concept and the approach that we always took was around helping individuals to tap into their own abilities and their own knowledge of their context, and really to work with them to understand how best to evolve them towards their best selves. So, evolving toward a more effective, a better version of where they were, rather than coming in and, inflicting some change program on them and believing that we knew better.
Yeah.
And I think really having the first conversation with them, say, hey, what are the challenges? Where does it hurt? And then, but not just at the leadership level or the folks that brought us in, but having that same conversation with the practitioners along the way and everybody that's involved in the change. What is it that we want to fix? What would success look like to you?
Yeah. What always struck me is, as we've kind of defined conscious agility as an approach for evolving business ecosystems, the thing that always hit me very, very deeply is how us three in particular, go right back to the notion of appreciation. You have to appreciate the context, the people, not come in with a predefined canned solution, remove the ego. We're very intentional to get it out of the way. And, just that sense of appreciation and humanity is uniquely different to what I think most people have experienced relative to transformation.
Well, I think some of the popular frameworks, some of them I think we referenced last time too. I mean, things like SAFE. I mean, lots of great practices, but to come into an organization and say, go do SAFE or go do it this way is something that it just adds a whole lot of headache that's not necessary, and it takes away exactly that. Let's appreciate where they're at, what the challenges are, and then let's co-create something that's going to work for them based on blending SAFE, but lots of other practices as well.
And I think the belief too that small directional change aimed at achieving some outcome is a lot easier to navigate than wholesale implementation of a model or as you noted, Mark. I think we've always believed there's greatness and brilliance in so much work that's been done out there, and fully understanding the context that you operate in and finding the right answer to the challenges that are most that really serve as the greatest opportunity to evolve solving those challenges, small bites, each one step at a time, evolving toward an ideal state, is a much more meaningful way to evolve an organization than to try and just achieve some wholesale change out of the gates.
Yeah, and I think along with that comes the ownership as well. So it's the small changes that they own. So we can look at a direction they're going and be like, be thinking in the back of our head, well, they could get a little further if they did this. But if they take a smaller step and they own it, and just helping to build that mindset that change never ends, right? To really get them in that mode that, hey, let's make this small improvement now, and then get into that mindset of continuously making these small incremental changes. So they could get to something, that we might view as, 3 steps down the road. If they take one at a time, it's all good.
And I love just listening to both of you, because these are some of the unique aspects, right? We didn't define ideal state and simply try to go there. We started with where they are, identified a degree of orientation, and then began to take those incremental steps. And we changed directions based on what we were learning continuously. Based on skill sets, right? Based on people, based on the governance structure, and all of those facets. And I think the other key thing that you both really emphasized is it's not just a feel-good exercise. Let's really focus on value. It's meaningful, it's tangible, and impactful in the broader scheme.
And from all the stakeholders too, like I said earlier, there's times where we come into an organization and you have a leader says, hey, just go fix these people, or go over and tell them that we don't need to have them get into this game of figuring it. And we're like, well, no, actually you do. But, but really finding out what's valuable to the folks involved, not just, a small group of the leadership that has an idea of what the end state should look like.
Yeah. If I want to throw this out there just as context for those that might be listening to the session, the recording, or might have joined us, if you will. In particular, there's 3 phases that we've talked about, and the define, the create, and refine. And I'm going to just throw out the main labels, but as context. But I'd love then for both of you to kind of elaborate and explore sort of your personal perspective relative to that backdrop, if that's all right.
Yeah.
In the define, we talk about establishing and discovering, and we establish a design team, and we discover a minimal ecosystem definition.
Mm-hmm.
In the create, we enact and we integrate, and this is about enacting experiences, and likewise integrating the stakeholders.
Yes.
And then in the refine, we talk about embracing and nurturing, and embracing those experiences and nurturing the stakeholders. And I know I've left a whole bunch of definitions out, which are there, but I would love kind of, we've had metaphors, we've had conversations that how do you paint that picture that I don't really just use the formal words for?
Yeah. Brad, do you want to start?
Sure. I think we imagine that metaphor of a blank canvas, and really, a lot of what we've described in conscious agility is all about really coming to the table without any preconceived notions. The define phase is all about really understanding the context that we're operating in, working with key parties from across an organization to really understand what are the perspectives, who are the stakeholders, what are the functions that folks play in an organization, really working with those individuals to understand what are the key things that they're involved in order to create value from their organization's perspective. How do these folks come together? What are the ways that they connect? We talk about touch points, and really then thinking about how do we begin to enact change in that environment? How do we create a new way of working? So working with those folks to imagine, how do we start to paint the picture on the canvas? How do we start to, we start with just a basic line drawing. I'm imagining just the simple version of the new state, and then through working alongside of those folks and enacting those change, we really start to layer in the details. So the refine phase, we start to practice what it is that we've imagined and learn from those practices. And once we feel like we've worked in that way enough, we start all over. We say, all right, so how do we loop back through and accomplish the next small increment of meaningful change? And really, it's, I think, probably not doing it justice, but define where you want to go, enact it, and then learn from it and refine it and loop back through.
Yeah. The piece I would add on to that too is the way that we structure it, in terms of, it's not this big, huge methodology. So the way we call it out as just conversation clusters, right? Where it's just a group of conversations that say, hey, let's talk about these things, right? Let's have conversations. And they're found fundamental questions around, identity, who we are, what's working, what's not working, where does the future look like? And then having these conversation clusters is just enough to focus the conversation to get us to the next stage and get the right information out.
Yeah, it's very powerful in that there isn't a preconceived notion. Again, back to some of the basic elements, right? The stakeholders and the value that's derived and the value that's co-created, the notion of identity around awareness and ownership, as we've talked about, the conversations and the conversation clusters really focusing on the values and the tenets that drive everything forward, as well as the purpose that's guiding us. And you could hear conscious business, right? You could hear the business agility in sort of under the spectrum, but it's really devoid of any particular framework, but can integrate whatever works in that context.
Most definitely. And that's what the power of those conversation clusters is, what would the future look like? Hey, well, let's take a look at this methodology. Let's look at that methodology. Look at this body of knowledge or that body and experiences, what's worked for you in the past. Let's not discount the things that are working in the organization and what do we want to bring to the table.
Yeah, and you mentioned before, Mark, what hurts? What problems are you experiencing in your environment? And the old "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater" cliche, or it's looking for what is it that we can do to really help advance the efforts of the organization, and doing so in thoughtful and deliberate ways. I think deliberate was a word that was always frequently thrown around in conversation amongst ourselves when we were working together. And how do we ensure we're very deliberate about how we approach this?
And I think it's the design thinking aspects, right? The analysis and synthesis. Let's look at some ideas and then let's pull some ideas together and try them out. Let's look at some ideas, then let's go broad, then narrow.
So I'm sorry, forgive me, Mark.
To do it. Again, we're just there. We're just leading the conversations. We're helping to facilitate the conversation. At that point, it's truly empowering the communities that are fostering the change. And
definitively pulling, as you mentioned, different bodies of experience into the conversations to feed us. So it's the facilitate, it's the catalytic advantage, respectfully, that unfolds as an experience together. And I say advantage because it helps the organization advance, helps the people advance. I would say that we ourselves change in the process as well.
No doubt. I think you mentioned it, when we first met, you're like, I learn from all my clients, right? And that's certainly something I experience every day. You come out, it's like, hi, that wasn't interesting. Wasn't expecting that to happen.
Yeah.
Right. But how about that? Yeah.
So since 2013, right, where we captured our work, if you will, from historical. Since then, what other influences, what other thoughts, what other sort of pieces have kind of really entered the picture in your experiences and your practices?
Yeah, I think for me, a couple things, just we say it all the time, that, hey, we talk about the three phases, the define, the create, and refine, but really authentically knowing that you don't have to necessarily do them in order, right? You can just really touch on it briefly and move on. And I saw, just in the last few years of practice, that really communities, they don't, the framework and really the strategic approach wasn't there. So you start with what you can, grabbing onto communities and starting to build out some of those aspects as a way to get to the next phase and do another cycle. I think that's one. As far as new bodies, not the one that I like, it was Judith that says, what is it? People thrive on being appreciated and being connected, right? And certainly Judith Glazier, I mean, we always has been at the heart of our work, an amazing contributor to the community, with the DNA of leadership, I think was the one we referenced when we started. And since then, creating We, but talking about connectedness. And I think one of the works that building on that is the stuff from Brene Brown. She talks about connectedness and looking at vulnerability and how vulnerability is really, the work. I think that's a TED Talk that has been seen by half the planet, but really digs deep on vulnerability. And I think that really is, I think Judith getting folks connected and that connectivity and integrating stakeholders is how we talk about it in the framework. And I think they really take that to the next level. So hopefully that wasn't too long-winded.
No, all good, man. All good. It's definitely we're definitely by all means having conversation. Any thoughts, Brad?
No, I think the interesting thing for me, since we've sat down and looked at capturing all of this and reflected on our experiences and tried to kind of codify what it was we were doing, I've since gone back inside of an organization, and the different perspective of being a stakeholder and not being just an external coach or champion of change, and how valuable having someone like that is. It's really, I've got a lot of kind of renewed appreciation and respect for those inside of organizations who seek to really make change or serve as kind of an internal champion of change. It's definitely valuable to seek out those who can help things along, because it's a different world when you're sitting in one of those chairs.
Yeah. Very well said. Very, very different. And the elegance to be able to balance as an internal stakeholder, as an internal player, as an internal contributor, the ability to balance your contribution, and I'm going to say very, very particularly, the ability to balance your contribution with the longevity of being in the organization, because you can go in and try to cause change, blow yourself up, if you will, or hurt somebody or blow up the organization. But to balance it with the longevity is an art, very much so. And then I'll add the other aspect to it, to be able to do that and maintain connectivity to an external world, so you can continuously feed yourself new energy, stay innovative, right? Stay connected to the customers, to the marketplace. It's an art form. I mean,
it is a whole different percent, because I'm in the same boat as Brad, right? In terms of working from the inside versus being a consultant that comes in and kind of helps to foster the change, and then really leaves the organization to continuously improve. Being on the inside, it's a whole different world. And that's why some of the experience around, hey, if we don't have the strategic direction that you get as a consultant coming in, where you are always connected at the top, coming in and not having that, you find other ways to do it. And that's really the fostering community and connecting dots, right? In terms of where are the points of energy internally that you can connect and try to take something small and grow it into something meaningful.
Yeah. And definitively, if a consultant or a coach that doesn't come in at the top, then how do they navigate internally in order to manifest change and work with and partner and what have you? How about questions that you guys have? I've been throwing out questions, if you will.
So I know, of course, since we wrote the ebook, Sai, you went on to write the Antifragility Edge, and what about you? How have things continue to evolve since then? I mean, I think you've got probably a lot of followers in the audience here, but what have you learned different, or how have you continued to expand on our experiences?
So there's a few sort of things that come to mind. One is, I'll start with the core one. I've yet to find partners like you two, very, very openly. The degree of care, the degree of openness, the degree of emphasis on the human element. So, and we all know, I mean, I think we'd all say good partners are very difficult to find. So that's one core aspect. The Antifragility Edge is an interesting book. Now that you've mentioned it, I look at that really as the anatomy of conscious agility. It's like if you rip conscious agility open, what's happening underneath the surface. That's really, those are the elements, if you will, that start to come together. And please tell me if you completely open, if you disagree with that statement, as antifragility is the anatomy of conscious agility. And I don't think you disagree, because all those elements that we naturally talk about are there.
Yep.
Like Judith's work you mentioned already. Viral change is another input into that. Tribal leadership is another aspect into it, amongst other things. So I'll pause just for a minute. Do you disagree that that's probably the anatomy more than anything else to all the good work that we've done?
No, I think that's spot on. And again, I think that's what I love about, and again, I've always appreciated about you, is being able to blend the different works together, right? Looking at things like, things that had delivering happiness, tribal leadership, all Judith's work, Barb Trotline's work, and, change intelligence, all those things, and being able to blend those different aspects and again, just bodies knowledge, finding the diamonds in the rough, finding the gold nuggets in each of those, and pulling it together that can really help get to a whole new level.
I appreciate that. Any thoughts, Brad, relative to kind of the statement I made? I'd love your insights.
I'm going to have to be honest. Forgive me here. I had a little bit of background noise going on when you had mentioned what you mentioned.
No worries. No worries.
No, nothing to add.
So the statement I made was really the Antifragility Edge is more or less the anatomy.
Sure.
Yeah. Kind of giving more details is the thought there.
No, I definitely, that was my impression when you shared it. Of course, we were grateful for, the advance opportunity, and then, went on to see the final outcome there. No, I mean, I think it reflects very much what it is that I think we took away from our time working with you, and how we benefited in helping to evolve the approach that you introduced us to. I think to be completely honest, and the thing that we helped to evolve alongside of you in the years we spent working with you. But
we definitely co-created, man. I mean, all around. I mean, I'm optimistic that we will do another book, as I've mentioned before, because I felt real lonely doing Antifragility Edge. I don't want to do another one on my own. Very, very openly. The other pieces I want to kind of add on, just if you will, back to kind of the question exactly as you asked, Brad. There's been other works, right, that have come out. Altimeter, if you will, published the stages of digital transformation. I think their first publication was 2016, and ultimately they continued every year. The most recent one is out there. They take a very digital transformation, technology oriented viewpoint, and they talk about disciplines that really begin to map to the same things that we were doing and talking about in 2013 and historically, and the stages. And I've actually got a blog on that one in particular. The other work that is more recent is Dave Snowden's work, and he actually, working with the European Commission, published Managing Complexity and Chaos in Times of Crisis. And there's some interesting language shifts, if you will, but in particular, he talks about stages, and one of the stages is called a pivot stage, which is what we call historically the shift. Exactly. Yeah. I didn't have to even finish the sentence. Yeah. Exactly. So he talks about that, and the other pieces, and I have not written a blog on this, but the mapping is interesting in that, and I want to mention a few things, and you'll hear some of it, and please chime in. He talks about assessing, if you will, adapting, pivoting, accepting, very similar to an element of evolution, and then transcending. And as you get into the details, he talks about activating the human sensory network. He talks about reducing granularity and distributing engagement. A lot of that sounds like the define and create.
That's very much. I mean, that's it. An act experience is all about activating.
Exactly. So, and then he. I'm sorry.
So again, we met a long time ago, and I've always been entertained by just how just appreciated this stuff. So you've always been one step ahead in terms of this. Looking at, I see the same thing in the scaled agile framework in terms of triads. They brought triads in a few years ago. We've been using that from the beginning, stuff coming right out of tribal leadership.
Yeah.
Communities of practice were things that they introduced very late in their evolutions, right? And that's stuff that we've been practicing from the beginning.
And it's definitely a we. I mean, it's definitely not me. I mean, it definitely is us. I mean, all around. I want to throw out a few more, if you will,
Yeah,
in particular, because I think it's when I mean, and I got a chance to read it. I really enjoyed it. It talks about landscapes of experience, if you will, or landscapes form experiences, and we discover opportunities in what we call the create. It's all rooted in experience, and very, very powerful. And then there's other elements of repurposing and extreme repurposing. Well, when we're creating, and we used to call birthing, right?
Yep.
And we repurpose all sorts of things just to get to birthing, and then we're birthing.
Well, that's it. Those are the conversations, right? Explore how best to organize, and then to organize, right? So really, the conversations on how do we want to put ourselves together, and then the experience of actually doing it is always the best part of any transformation.
Exactly. And again, a few more elements, if you will. Then there's elements from the transcend, in particular, stage as it's discussed, where we manage cadences and control, and we ritualize learning. That ties very deeply to the communities, to the governance, all those facets that come into play. And the language continues. We talk about framework, right? We refer to the framework, and we refer to it as a skeleton, if you will, exactly as the canvas that Brad you mentioned.
It starts with a blank canvas, and then the sketch is the skeleton. Yep.
The use of the word scaffolding is the word that is commonly used. We talk about, we've talked about appreciating, right, and helping the organization move in a direction, not necessarily a particular destination. The way that it's talked about in Dave's work is evolutionary potential. Start with where you are, and you get that evolutionary potential. They use a bit of triads as well at this point, exactly like you mentioned. So I'm honestly intrigued, if you will, by what I'm seeing. And if I realize I've been rambling a bit, but I want to add one other thing, if you will, to this. I think there's a miss, and and the miss is this, and I want to put it out there for us three in particular. I think the miss is we historically have focused so deeply on client work. We really didn't focus on brand building. We love what we do with our clients and with our, now that you're inside organizations. And in that way, we didn't focus on we neglected building a brand. I'll put it that way. And perhaps we didn't participate as much in the community because we were in it, doing it, for lack of better word. Yeah. And I think other people have, and some of the things I just mentioned actually just came out in 2021. So it's very recent. And, our work goes back to 2013, and, not to discount anyone, but I think the miss is likewise is a lot of people focused on brand and being part of a community, but not necessarily tapping, and they're doing their own client work, but not necessarily perhaps engaging us or us engaging them in a way that we could all grow together. So I think there is a bit of a miss on all parts, which is humbling.
Well, I think the work that you're doing now with, catalyzing the future, I think is a real opportunity to keep pulling together and building community and pulling together these experiences, and once again, just building and building on what we're learning by doing the work with the clients.
You're thinking something, Brad?
No, I think it's interesting to hear your take on some of. We were two heads down, and I think that's fair. I mean, I do. And I think,
and it's not bad. I mean, it's we care. Honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was always what was most important to us every step of the way was providing as much of a service as we could to those who we were working with and on behalf of, and as much as I hesitate to say it as directly as I'm going to, is there's a real lack of ego with this trio. And sometimes it was unfortunate for us that we weren't more interested in the self-promotion end of things and
building the brand.
Yep.
And you actually read my mind, because I was going to say one of the things that we were very turned off, respectfully, enough ego to maintain integrity and identity. So it's not merely extreme, but rather what I think we experienced, and you two would correct me, please, as we would engage perhaps in opportunities, we would find ego, and it was such a turnoff that it's like, hey, if it's all about ego, we're not really interested.
Mm-hmm.
But we have searched for opportunities in many ways. Would you agree? Would you disagree? Or I mean, I think
I'm with you. I mean, that's and maybe that's we're very. It's to me, passing credit along is working with others, and especially working with the client. We don't want to take. I mean, that's their win, right? When we're working with a client, we get a good, nice core team together in the define phase, and work with them. We're putting them on the stage. I mean, I think that's back to our cars example, the AutoVin example. It's like, let's highlight what we're doing. Let them highlight their experiences and the wins they've had. And the downside is we don't have these large frameworks to sell for better or for worse.
I think that's completely fair. We've worked with some incredible folks who come from very passionate places, and who quite frankly have put themselves through a lot to enact change in their organizations, and all we've done is help them to really understand their own potential and really help guide them on their journey, and give them the tools, I think, and expose them to, I think Mark touched on it before, and I think it comes through every time that folks talk with you, Cy, the appreciation for all of the great work that is out in available to everyone in the community, and you've always been especially great at helping folks to find those works that they need at the right time, and to expose folks to ideas and teachings that really do help to just kind of paint a more complete picture, and at the exact right time.
You're both very, very kind. I'll say the big differentiator that comes to my mind, with there is a lot of great stuff out there. And, I mentioned Altimeter and Brian Solis's work, very digital technology focused.
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned Cognitive Edge and Dave Snowden work, very complexity focused. So you see that theme. The thing I think that we always return to relative, and actually there's Boundaryless, if you will, another organization by Simone, who focuses on platforms and now focuses on ecosystems, where again, we have the history.
Yeah.
I think we always return to the people and the human element, which is where we started in our previous conversation. And that continues to anchor us.
It works.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I mean,
sometimes to our own detriment. I'll put it that way, that we get exhausted.
But it's interesting. I mean, because if we would come up and say, hey, here is the way, then we'd be right in the same boat with them, right? There is no magic formula. There is no silver bullet, right? But it's really just, there's lots of great experiences. All those ones you mentioned, I'm sure there's lots of good stuff to pull from every one of them.
Yeah.
Right. But, just anchor, pull it together. Yeah. Just pull it together.
Brad, you were going to say something, man.
Yeah.
Dynamics over mechanics.
There you go. That's it.
Yeah. It doesn't get much simpler, right? I mean, it really doesn't.
No.
I know I'm pushing time here. I've got one more question, if that's all right. And then I know our next conversation will be very, very much around sharings and learnings, very specifically. But if you look at the successes, or the wins, for lack of better words, and the challenges, and for almost any other words, kind of the losses that we've experienced, are there any sort of parting thoughts relative to that? I mean, just from the wins, the losses, the challenges, kind of sort of parting thoughts that we can share in anticipation. There's almost a preview of the next session. I'll put it that way.
To me, the easy one, again, the clients that did well and the ones that did much less well are the ones that said, come in and tell my folks how to do it, right? They want you to come in with a pre-canned solution. They just run, it just doesn't work. You got to go on the journey, the transformation. It's going on the journey together with the folks that are impacted by it.
Yeah, I think that's it as well. Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. I think, you know, you can say it pretty directly. At the time where all of us worked side by side, it was in the era of everybody caught the Scrum and Agile bug, and you know they wanted folks to come into their technology organization and help them to, you know, be agile, and we frequently had to fight that desire to just throw a framework, or you know, not that we, you know, I mean, we worked with a lot of teams that we helped to leverage tools like Scrum, and apply the framework probably more cleanly than a lot of other consultancies did. But it wasn't the emphasis. You know, those were tools that were a means to an end. You know, really focusing on the dynamics and understanding the unique aspects of the organization and helping them to appreciate one another and appreciate the different perspectives, and those who are willing to go on that, as Mark said, on that journey and put in that hard work, because it's not easy work. You know, had always come back later and said, "Wow, what an experience! This was something that, you know, we really benefited from, and we will take it with us." And the great thing is, at the end of the day, those folks were armed to look at other tools and other frameworks as they emerge and become available, and assess them from a perspective of, is this something we can leverage in a healthy way in order to continue to advance what it is that we're doing, versus those who are seeking some destination that doesn't exist. Yeah, I just want to be better. Yeah, well, what does that mean? You know, so I think that's been my takeaway over the years, and I think it, you know, it emerged out of our work together. I continue to see it. There are those who just think that there's some magical destination that, you know, they just need to find the person who's got the answer. And you know, I think anytime you see that and you have a difficult time really going after that, there's a chance that maybe it won't go so well. Yeah.
Well said. Well said on both of your parts. Definitively a journey, and dynamics over mechanics, by all means. And if I add anything else on top of it, I would say the people's intentions manifest along that journey, and you can't hide people's intentions manifest because they have to confront their own nature, because it's not an easy journey by any stretch, and it takes confidence and courage to take it as far as they and we can with them, and optimistically we leave them in a, I think Mark used to always remind us, you know, leave them in a better place than you found them.
That's all we can do.
There you go. Anything else, gentlemen, before we sign off in anticipation of our last session with key learnings?
No, nothing for today. Thank you. It's always a pleasure.
Indeed.
Thank you.
Likewise. Thank you both. And
Thanks,
for
guys.
those, thank you so much, Brad. Thank you so much, Mark. For those that have joined us, for those listening to the recording, hopefully you'll join us for the third session and final session. And most definitely, we will look forward to more good stuff with these fine gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you.